Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Anna Jinja. Looking forward to our conversation today, Anna.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to it. It's been a while since we last chatted, so I was like, yes, I get to talk to Simon today.
Yeah, me too. I feel the same way, and it's lovely to always lovely to speak to fellow adoptees and fellow adoptee podcast hosts, and that takes it to a different level. Um, and thank you very much for uh, having me on your podcast. I really enjoyed that conversation. So here on Thriving Adoptees, we like to ask, what does thriving mean to you? What comes to mind when you hear the name of the podcast, Thriving Adoptees?
Well, what I love about it is that, and we had talked about this before, is that for most of my life, I have not wanted to talk about my adoption story. So it wasn't until I was 47 that I really embraced talking about my adoption story because of the podcast. Before, when anyone asked me about it, I would try to find all sorts of strategies and ways to not talk about being an adoptee. I wanted to, my name is Anna Jinja. Jinja is the name that the adoption agency gave me, but I would never speak it. If I could avoid it, I would not say it. And so with this podcast, which is the Anna Jinja Show, I'm forced to say my name every week. And so when I think about thriving adoptees, I think of all the ways that I really spread hate about myself, about being an adoptee and turning my back on what it meant to be an adoptee. And as I enter into my 50s, I don't want to tell many people that, but
Huh?
as I turn into I just turned 50 a couple of years ago. This month turned 52. I think this decade is a great one for me to thrive, to be thriving. And that means for me embracing my adoption story and learning. And Simon, I've learned so much from your podcast and from our conversations where I didn't even know what questions to ask or what things and what issues are connected to being an adoptee, that adoptee trauma, and about why adoptees are mobilizing to be able to advocate for our population. I didn't know that. And so the thriving piece is really the learning and accepting of my own story and not turning my back to who I am.
Right. Wow. So what was it what was it that kept you holding back? Why was it that you didn't want to talk about this stuff until you hit 47?
Well, I think it's because I grew up in Iowa. I was adopted from Korea. My adopted family are Norwegian, so there was no question that I was adopted. I'd have to be a complete moron to not know that I was adopted. You look at the family pictures and you're like, which one doesn't look like the other? It's Anna. And I think when you're a young person and you're growing up in the Midwest and you're the only person that looks like you try to find strategies to be able to belong. And so the way that I did that is that when my parents would, um, try to teach me about my Korean culture and what did it mean to be in a Korean adoptee, the whole agency, the International Adoption Agency that was adopted, hosted these picnics and information sessions for my parents and invited me to be part of, and I would never, ever go. I just would. I want to think of all the ways that I thought meant being an American and being a normal kid. And that meant not acknowledging that I was adopted from Korea and that I was different. And, I tell a story about like the summer of 13, which is a very awkward age. I wore sunglasses inside and outside because I thought it would conceal my identity. I think people would think, oh, she's not an Asian because they can't see my eyes. And when I think back about that 13-year-old kid doing that to herself, how terrible. What a terrible thing to hate yourself that much that you would go that far well, and first of all, I look like a dork. I mean, I would be walking around thinking, and my mom thought, well, she's trying to be like a movie star kind of thing. And it really wasn't from that place. It really was a place of self-hatred.
Yeah. Ah, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
It's so
hard.
shit, isn't it?
Yes, it's as you guys say, shite. It's utter shite.
Yeah, I normally try and say SH1T to be polite, but I didn't really feel the I didn't really feel politeness was the right score when you're sharing that that story, that's uh, we talk a lot about stuffing feelings on this show. You know,
Mhm.
that's Pamela Karanova. Have you come across Pamela Karanova?
Yes.
Um, she talks about like the booze as her ultimate stuffing strategy, right? And because we feel that our emotions are so huge, they're going to overwhelm us, and therefore we stuff with booze or whatever we stuff with to avoid the feelings. Um, and it sounds like that was kind of you, but it was deeper than your feelings that you were stuffing. You were trying to stuff your identity.
Yeah,
Yeah, is that what
100%.
it was?
Yeah, I was trying to conceal that. And then when I remember the first time that someone screamed at me that, that I was they were driving in a car and screamed at me, "Look, you stupid chink." And I remember like I didn't even know what that was at that time. I was 10 or 11. But I knew it was something that was not nice. And then when it was explained to me what it was another way of like um that I have to be a cause for me to be fearful in my world, and that if someone's screaming at me like that from a car, they're doing it from a place of hate and a potential a way of wanting to do harm to me. And so I had all that going on, growing up in Iowa. My grandparents were in North Dakota. And also just trying to like, what is like the ideal standard of beauty? For me, it was at that time Madonna, Cyndi Lauper, all those, and I did not look like that. There wasn't anyone that looked like me that was like that I could say, "Oh, that's cool." And people would say, "You look like you're this or that," and I'd be like, "I'm not even that." So whatever. And so when we say I'm not this, if someone had said to me, "Anna, you look like Cindy, Cyndi Lauper," I'd be like, "Oh, that's great." If someone said to me, "You look like Milan," I'm like, "I don't even look like Milan. I'm not a cartoon character." There's such hostility that goes to what I'm not and what I am. And that's when you talk about thriving. I really hope that as I step into this decade, that I say, I am Anna, I am adopted from Seoul, Korea. I don't know the beginning, my origin story. I know it was told to me. And as I'm doing this podcast and listening to podcasts like yours and reading more and more information and books about what it means to be an adoptee, that I'm able to ask myself those questions and step into who I'm meant to be in this world and who I am. I didn't get to choose what I look like, where I was born. If I did, I would look like, I don't know, a supermodel or something, but I'm short and I'm Asian.
Yeah, yeah. So what changed then about, was it 47 you said?
Yes.
So
Well,
what was it that changed? You've denied it, you've
Mhm,
stuffed it, you've had all that emotional shite, right?
mhm.
You've had all that identity shite, and then something happened for you and something changed. So what was that?
Well, I was living in England with my significant other at the time. We broke up and I had to figure out what was I going to do. So I went back to my home state to Iowa. I said I would never go back to Iowa. And I think that at some level I knew I had to go back to where I grew up to figure out why is it that there's these things that are happening in my life, these decisions that I've made, why? And I knew I had to go home to figure out and answer those questions. And when this was right before COVID, I had another opportunity to be part of a community radio station. They needed volunteers to come on because of COVID. And I must have said on air that, I'm adopted. I came back to my home state from the whole agency. And from that, more and more adoptee stories started to come to me. My show was not about adoptees at that time. It was about connection through COVID. But as more and more stories came to me and people were telling me their story of like I was abandoned in a box in the path of a social worker, and that's the story that I was told. And so as you hear more of those things and the truth starts to be revealed to who you are through other people's stories, it forced me to ask those questions about myself. And because I was going through a heartbreak and trying to figure out my life, I really was forced to ask those questions. And then when I started doing more and more shows with inviting adoptees to come on, and I was asking them questions, really, I was asking myself those questions. Like, so how does it feel to be different? How does it feel when someone, I wrote a novel when I was in Iowa, and I used, my adopted mom says, you used your lived experience, your lived adoption experience, and fictionalized it. And that's how I processed my trauma, my adoptee trauma, and some other things through this fictionalized version of my story. And I think it's because I was afraid to ask those questions like we were talking about. And there's a scene in the story about a woman who has two adopted children and two biological children. And the woman says, I actually feel different towards my biological children, that mama bear protective kind of thing towards my biological children. I don't feel that way about my adopted children, and sometimes I hate them. And it was the first time that I had ever heard anyone express that. And she was in a moment of frustration, but she felt like she could confide that to me, maybe forgetting that I was an adoptee. But I'd never heard that before. And that truth, her truth, oh my gosh, it was like it hit me in the gut kind of thing. And it made me ask those questions. Am I wanted? Am I loved? Do I belong? And are these all these people saying to me, you were loved so much that you were abandoned, and that's why your birth mother gave you up? Is that the truth? When my adopted parents, say, I love you just as the same as I do my other biological children, is that the truth? And when you operate where you don't know what the truth is, then there comes a time where you're going to have to ask yourself those questions and process it with either a therapist or other adoptees or groups or some place where you can ask those questions without being afraid of people judging you or saying, of course, you should be grateful that you were like adopted by this amazing family. You could have been abandoned and ended up a hooker on the streets of Seoul, Korea. And so when people tell you those things, it makes you feel ashamed of like how you feel about yourself. And that's that thriving piece is like, I don't want that anymore. I don't want to feel ashamed anymore. I want to own my truth, and I want to be able to ask those questions with courage.
Yeah. So how?
Yeah, how? And I think it's through like you were saying when you hosted that first workshop session in the summer about how adoptees can advocate for themselves. I wanted to get on that and hear, and I had never heard a group in those panelists that you had put together that passion and those information. I was like, wow, that is a lot of information, but really good information for me to ask myself, like, so are you being really honest when you say that doesn't hurt me, that doesn't bother me? And in fact, it does. And there are ways to be able to advocate for yourself that I didn't know. And I want to share that with others. I do it a little different than maybe some others because, as we talked about, the way that I do my show are these creative collisions where the people come on, they tell their stories, I match them to a musician or poet. Because for me, I believe I want people to like take a step and listen to someone's story in a new way and say, I have nothing in common with this adoptee. I'm not connected to adoption. But the fact is, you should be, because there's always like someone that's connected in your family, in your neighborhood or community, and ask those questions and learn.
Yeah. So what does identity mean to you then?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Simon. And for me, identity is like figuring out all the pieces that who I am. So like when I think about the things I don't get to choose, the way that I physically look, but there are things that I get to choose as far as like what makes who I am, those circles of like what makes Anna. I'm Asian. I was born in Seoul, Korea, as far as I know. I was raised in the Midwest in Iowa. I like I like carrots. I like I do not like kimchi. I'm just I'm just being honest. I used to think maybe I don't like kimchi because I'm just trying to reject everything that's a being an adoptee in Korean. But let me tell you, I really do hate it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I can't like it. But all those things about identity are like what are the authentic things that make me me? And owning it. And sometimes I'll change my mind, but the core piece of who I am is there.
Yeah. I before we hit record, I was told you about chairing a panel last week at a conference about adoption, and there was a transracial adoptee on there. He happened to be black rather than Asian, but I have actually interviewed somebody here in the UK who is was born in Hong Kong but raised in the UK, and they talked about a flexibility and the fact that they got to choose what what they got to choose what adoption meant to them. So the woman from Hong Kong, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. It's a lot of episodes ago. Um, she said that I get to pick like a we have this thing called pick and mix in kids. Yeah, you have that
Yeah,
like
yeah,
where
yeah.
you've got
Uh-huh.
what you call candy, right? You
Yes.
call sweets.
Yeah.
You know, I used to work in a sweet shop, and you know like there's this table, you know, there's this there's these compartments with, and you can pick and mix. You can pick the sweets that you want, right? So pick and mix and decide what's important to you about uh, uh, about you. And so it's a free choice. And she said that she could choose to pick the bits that she thought her Asian heritage helped her with, and then
Mm.
she could pick the bits that she felt her white um, surroundings had helped her with. So it was kind of down to her, and it was the ultimate in terms of an empowered view of her own identity.
And I think that's true. I think that one of the books that helped me was a book called The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. And one of the sections she talked about how what deciding what does she really like. So I think it was opera music that she said, I actually don't like opera music. I know that I feel like I should like opera music, but I don't. And I think all those questions about what I should be versus what I am and making sure that when I step into that is all as a path of the path to thriving is authenticity. It is like figuring out who we are meant to be in this world and who we are and embracing that and being able to say, with pride, I love myself instead of wearing sunglasses and trying to hide who I am and hating myself, that I emphasize and figure out, well, what are the ways that I can emphasize the features that I am and be proud of that and not ashamed or scared to to be something that I'm not. Now, I think that there are some people and there's some situations where I would love to, I just saw Wicked. I would love to look like Ariana Grande. I would love to sing like her. I think she's amazing. I don't look like her, and if you listen to me sing, the dogs will be screaming and howling because I'm terrible. And so that's part of life too, is just accepting there's just certain things that are never going to be possible for me. I am never going to get on stage and sing and have thousands of people pay to do it. Now they'll pay me to stop. I mean, that might be the new gig. Is that, oh yeah, stop singing, we'll give you $500. But it's not ever going to be to cheer me on to sing like four more songs.
No, no. My wife's uncle actually did that once.
I
He
love that.
so he was a Scottish guy. Unfortunately, he died
I'm sorry.
2 years ago, I think it was
Oh, I'm
last year.
sorry.
I don't know. It was pretty profound because my wife had actually donated a kidney to him, and he didn't last. He didn't last very long after that. Um, but yeah, he. So it was on. The Scottish people don't call New Year's Eve New Year's. They call it Hogmanay, right? And they were at this Hogmanay bash party, and there was you know like a folk, I don't know, folk musicy type band, something that he didn't like. So he went up to them and he gave them money and then said that it was actually to stop playing and put the disco on, right? So instead of get rid of the old fashioned music and put the Ariana Grande on, I guess, or whatever. Yeah, and I don't know what actually happened. So
Well, I
maybe I
love that
shouldn't have
he lived
started.
his bullets. I
Sorry?
love that he had the courage to be able to do that, and it
Did
sounded
that?
like
Yeah.
somebody that really like embraced life.
Well, yeah. But can you think, but what would you have felt like if you'd been the guy that was
Yeah, I
told
would have
to,
felt terrible.
yeah,
Yes.
well, sorry, I don't know. Maybe you
Yeah.
just laughed it off. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, I like carrots as well. Carrots are I think carrots are much under because they're so common, aren't they?
Yes.
They're underrated. They're an underrated vegetable, but they become so ubiquitous. They don't get the love that they need. And
But
I've
we
never tried.
do.
Sorry, we love
But
them.
we do.
We love
Yes.
them. And but I've never tried kimchi, so I can't go along with that. Whether I can't say whether I like it or not. It's what is it?
It's rotten cabbage, basically.
Okay. Well, I'm not really a fan of non-rotten cabbage. So
Yeah.
do you know? I so yeah. And I've
There's
had
probably a better description.
yeah, I've had have they do it in Germany? They have
Yeah, sauerkraut. Yeah.
sauerkraut. Is
It's a Korean
sauerkraut
version of sauerkraut.
and
Yes,
are
I
they
would say.
how similar are they?
I think so. I think that the kimchi is definitely more spicy. So it's a spicy version of
Right.
sauerkraut, I would describe it.
I have tried sauerkraut living in Germany for a while and just once,
Yeah.
never again on that. Um, so the was there a specific you talked about that moment when you had that racism when you were a kid. You talked about the moments on the radio show. Was there a tipping point? Was there a particular moment when this came into focus for you, or was it more of a general thing, a gradual thing, should we say?
I think it was a gradual thing. I think that the podcast experience accelerated my thoughts about what does it mean to be an adoptee and answering those questions. And for me, when I decided to not do the podcast in Iowa anymore because I got married and moved to Athens, Ohio. There was parents that called me. They had read an article about me in the Iowa magazine about the podcast. And they said to me, Anna, our daughter, who's 40 years old, just turned 40, adopted from the same agency as you, just disowned us. And the reason why she disowned us is because she felt that, did some research, and felt that adoption was actually a human trafficking institution and that it had done a disservice to her to being adopted and that they shouldn't have done it. And she was 40 though, and raised as an infant as their child. And these parents said to me, you, this is our daughter. We watch movies with her. We raised her. We love her. And I hope that you continue to do the show because when we listen, we feel connected to our daughter. And when she comes back to us, we'll be able to ask her the questions that she needed to be asked that we didn't even know.
Yeah.
And so that for me, that made me
Wow.
think about my own experience, the inner rage that I had that I didn't know why I was feeling angry and frustrated and rejected, all of those things swirling in my heart and mind to be able to think, well, how do we come to a place of mutual understanding, of being able to like figure out there's an abundance of love. It's not a finite amount. And how do we expand that and be able to love each other even when it is really hard and challenging and we don't want to.
Yeah.
And so that's why I continue to do the podcast is because I want to be able to figure out like how do we share the grief and the sorrow and have you understand even if it's a little sliver of what it means to feel like you don't belong and that as an adoptee that from the very first act of our lives in that first chapter we don't for many of us we don't know why we were abandoned and why we were rejected and when people say that you should be grateful for having a home and food and not acknowledging that I feel abandoned and bad and rejected then you make me feel like I can't acknowledge something that is a really important part of who I am. And that does not feel good.
Yeah. Isn't it about them not being happy with our lack of happiness?
Yeah, sometimes it's just like, you know what, I love you enough to say, I'm going to be there for you in your unhappiness. You don't have to be happy or be, I had somebody on the show the other day, a young person who said, I have to earn my way into this family as an adoptee and prove that I have a place in this family and on my football team and in my school. And I said, you don't have to earn your way at all. You are here, you belong, you matter, you're loved. And if someone feels uncomfortable with that, that's their problem, not yours. And so I
Yeah.
don't think he's ever heard that before. And what I want him to focus on is that you don't have to earn your way in this world. Because you're an adoptee, that's absolutely utter shite, as we started to say. And when you say something to somebody that I feel hurt, I feel mad about this or that. And if the person rejects that, you have to guide them to a place of the way that you love me is you accept all of my emotions and range of emotions. It's not a menu where you get to pick an appetizer and a dessert here. You either pick the whole menu or you figure out how to do that because that's the deal.
Yeah. And is there, I mean, for me, this strikes me as there's a sense of irony that your adopted parents were doing what they thought was the thing, right? Trying to take you to culture camps or heritage camps or whatever that was, organized by Holt,
Mm.
and that you didn't want to do that. So it was they were trying, but whatever, however they positioned it to you, however they explained it to you, it didn't, you didn't want to do it.
Yeah, I
Um,
did it to myself.
well, um, yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah.
well, kind of. I kind of, I feel that I want to go into a bit of a, a I don't know what to call it, a teaching moment, but a sharing
Mhm.
moment about that. And I'm not sure whether that's appropriate or not. Do
I'd
you,
say go for it. Let's
you
do it.
sure?
Yeah.
Have you heard of, we talk about this a fair bit on the show. Have you heard of parts work? No. Have you heard of something called internal family systems?
Yes, that I
Yeah.
have.
Okay. So internal family systems is a type of parts work.
Okay.
Okay. Um, and if you've heard me talking about this in the past, it might when I share the metaphor, it might make sense. So have you ever played Trivial Pursuit?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So if you think about, you get that, you get a pie holder.
Hmm.
You get a pie holder. Each person that's playing Trivial Pursuit gets a pie holder. That's a circular thing that takes the six pies, right?
Yes, and I always want the blue one.
You
Yep.
wanted the blue one? Okay.
Hmm.
Good for you.
Uh-huh.
No gender stereotypes here, right?
No,
You want
that's
the
right.
blue one?
Right.
That's great.
Yep.
Okay, right. So IFS to me is Dick Schwartz talks about the uppercase S self, right? And that's the true self. Okay, that's the pie holder.
Mm,
Okay, and the parts are the individual pies.
I gotcha.
So the parts of the individual pies. And what seemed to me, right? So what would seem to me is that the parts were arguing with each other. Yeah. So one pie was arguing with another pie,
Mm,
but
yes.
that's not who you are. You are the pie holder. You are the uppercase S self. So I'll give you an example of how from my own stuff, right? So I used to worry and then worry about worrying and tell myself that I shouldn't worry. Yeah. So that was two different parts of me fighting with each other. And I use the word self, but none of those parts, those cheeses, the parts, the cheeses, that's not our self. Our self is the uppercase S self. And within there, the all is calm, right? So Dick Schwartz talks about the eight C's of IFS, of the eight C's of the uppercase S self, and one of them is calm.
Mm,
So the fight that's going on is between our parts, but the uppercase S self is always at peace.
mm, I
So
like that.
we fight against our parts. So we like anger and rage for me is about not accepting a, a part of me that I don't like.
Mm,
A cheese of not it's one cheese arguing with another cheese,
yeah.
and that's not ourself. Ourself is the uppercase ourself, right? So that's for me. That's my focus. My focus is not on my parts. My focus is not on the cheeses. My focus is on the cheese holder because that's my uppercase self, and that's what identity means, like uppercase S self. So the uppercase S self has no anger because the anger is in the parts. The uppercase S self has no worry because the worry is in the parts. The uppercase self has no fear because the fear is in the parts. The uppercase S self has no trauma because the trauma is in the parts. So this is about a shift in, for me, a shift in my focus from my parts to myself.
Well, that makes a lot of self. Makes a lot of sense, and I think that my cheeses have been at war with each other for a long
Yes,
time.
yes,
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm.
So we're going to kind of like we're waving a white flag, but
Yes.
you've already been doing that, right? You've
Yeah.
already that's what you've been doing. This is just a different way of putting it. Yeah. So we talk about there's a civil war. There's a civil war going on inside our head, but it's not civil at all, right?
Yeah.
It's the most uncivil war going. What we're doing here is we're waving the white flag of peace, and we're bringing calm, and that's why I think what the genius of the IFS stuff is is that this focus on the uppercase S self is one thing, right? But also the attributes or attributes, I don't know how you should say it, of these eight C's. So calm, confident, connected is another one, right? Connected. You talked about connection.
Hmm.
I we you and I touched a deep place of connection every time we talk. You touch a deep place of connection with the guests that you have on your podcast. We get to that place of connectedness, and we're aligning. So we're aligning to our to love. We're aligning to a shared experience of trauma. What we're not doing is we're saying, "Oh well, I'm a domestic adoptee and you're a transracial adoptee, and those two are different." We're not. We're focusing on our shared humanity rather than the differences in our story.
Yes, I love that very much. And what you're talking about too is Dr. Martin Seligman, who is the founder and father of positive psychology, right? And looking at what are the things that lead to happiness, which, for him is the PERMA, which is the positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning and mattering, and accomplishment. And so when you look at those and connect it to your upper self, your upper S, and the cheeses is putting that together of looking at how do we connect, how do we create community, and how do we advocate and make meaning out of the past to a place of peace.
Yeah. Did Martin Seligman, is he the guy that did the emotional intelligence, or I'm getting confused?
That's a different guy.
That's a
But
different guy.
yes.
Yeah, yeah,
But Dr. Seligman, he talks about this whole thing, and I think for you, and when I listen to your podcast, and again through the facilitated workshops and conversations that you are hosting, and the work that you're doing within an adoptee community, all of that is leading to a place of what is happiness? And happiness isn't just like, ha ha ha, I'm happy, giggling, eating candy all the time. It is finding peace and it's finding acceptance. It's finding ways to be able to like navigate through this world together.
Yeah. And isn't that all built into the uppercase S self?
Yeah,
Isn't, and the
100%.
eight C's?
Yes. Yeah, I had never heard of that before, but I love that very much. And those and these teachable moments that you're sharing, when we listen to that as an adoptee, as a listener, then we're going along our merry lives, but at the same time, we're going through this transformation of being able to be introduced to these teachable moments and concepts to be able to like figure this out together. So I don't want 13-year-old adoptees out there wearing sunglasses and hating themselves. I don't want for that guest who said I have to earn my place in this world to feel that everything he does is if I do this, I'm good enough. Screw that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And so I think all of this is saying, F this, we are going to do this in a new way, but it has to be
Yeah.
through conversation, connection, and community. It really
Yeah.
does.
It does. And I think, like one of the differences is something that perhaps occurred for that 40-year-old transracial adoptee when she talked about the child trafficking and stuff like that, is I think that the difference between let's put it this way. The difference between adoption in the UK and adoption in the US adds more adds more layers of trauma, adds more layers of difficulty, adds more layers of challenges because simply put, there's far more international adoption in the US than there is in the UK, and also in the UK the government. So on one hand, this sounds really terrible because the government are actually funding adoption. The adoptive parents don't fund it, right?
Mhm.
So on one hand, you could say, well, this is state-sponsored child trafficking. I guess that's one way you could look at it. Um, and yet the other different way of looking at it is, when I saw a a menu, a price list for adoptees, and it's different prices for different types of adoptee, different color, different, physical stuff. I was almost sick, and transparency on and that market, me, the market what's the word, mechanism, the market mechanism, the fact that it's a market that makes it like, that's another thing for us to be, um, yeah, fight against, to be really angry about, and that it just adds to the shite, you know.
Yes. And certainly the complexity. And I think that as
That's a
we learn
nice,
the
polite
truth,
way of putting it. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, well, and I think that as I learn more even about adoptions in Central and South America, and the stories are coming to me about how mothers are basically forced to give up their children because of financial reasons, because they can't afford to feed the
yeah,
child that they just gave birth to and the siblings that are behind. I think that is unacceptable. I just think that now I also think adoption, there is a need. There are children that actually need homes, and so we're fulfilling a need here. You need a home, we have a home, there's a connection. And so I think it is acknowledging the darkness that comes with some of the adoption stories and how we are adopted, but also acknowledging that, for example, the Holt family, I'm learning more and more about the Holt family. I've just received 3 books about the Holt International Adoption Agency, and they are not all bad. The reasons why they did what they did is because they were motivated by wanting to help children in Korea. Now, are there some complexities or shite that's interwoven into that adoption agency? Absolutely. And so we have
yeah,
to talk about that and figure that out, because when we don't talk the truth, that is when those darkness just cracks
Yeah.
through and does so much damage. And what you're saying, it puts us at war with ourselves. And that is like it stops us, it prevents us from what you're trying to do is have the thriving component of what can be if we shine the
Yeah.
light on the truth. And you do that.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do. So I'm always delighted to hear that I'm achieving what I'm trying to achieve, right? Um, so picking up and trying to step back for a minute and kind of ask you a question about what you're saying. So you talk about truth, you talk about asking questions, you talk about exploration. What else is it? I mean, like so I've come up with three things there that are drivers. Thri Oh, there's something there, isn't there? Thriving drivers.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I like it.
drivers of thriving.
Yes.
What would it be? I don't know. Anyway, there's three of them there. So what did we say? We said the truth. We said asking questions, and we said exploration. So exploration, questioning, and the truth. What other drivers do you see of thriving? Well,
Well,
first
I
off, do you
think
think? First off, do you agree with that kind of summation?
Yeah, I think that those asking questions about being curious. If you're not curious, then you're not going to ask good questions. I think that also the part about community of like building community of that builds strength and so that you know that you're not alone. And part of the power for me of learning about doing this podcast project is that I don't know who listens to my show. I'm not like you. I don't have, I know that I don't have 100,000 downloads. Maybe it's five or six, but I have to believe that in creating community, no matter how we do it, is so that those that listen or are part of the show feel that they are not alone, that you've
Yeah,
got somebody who can like you can ask those questions, to be curious and to ask those questions. Another part I think that's important that we don't talk a lot about is creativity, of having that growth mindset to be able to like figure out like what are the ways that we can, that you just said, thriving drivers or driving driver thrivers, let's explore a little bit and figuring out what are the ways that we can use our creative ways, whether that's through poetry or music or hosting. You just said you just did a facilitated a conference with, I don't know, let's say 100, 200, 3,000 people there. Well, that gives you the opportunity to be creative, to ask those questions while you've got a captive audience to say, how do we move forward? This is what I know from like having 100,000 listeners download my episodes because they're curious and they're craving connection and community and questions. And you do that where you ask, how can I do this better? What can I do? How can I do this? I learned maybe this doesn't work, but this does work. And the more creative that we can be in these connections, like you're in the UK right now, I'm in the US, and we're still making this conversation happen. That's absolutely amazing. And I love that so much in the world that we live in today.
yeah, I love it too. And so it's coming up 2 years ago now. I was talking about metrics with a transracial adoptee called Vin, who's been on the show a couple of times. I haven't spoken to him recently. Um, I did email him and don't hear back. Anyway, um, but he said, uh, Simon, you're getting because I was comparing myself to somebody else, right? And he said, you're getting quality confused with quantity.
Mhm.
So there's always going to be somebody ahead of us. There's always going to be somebody behind us, right? We do it. It's really important for me. Like I do the podcast in the way that uh, that I feel best, and you do your podcast in the way that you do that. But you've got, like one of the reasons I've got these numbers of downloads is because of the number of episodes I've got, and because I haven't got a day job, right? So give yourself a break on that, right?
Oh, thank
On the
you.
day job, because like you've this is a side gig, and I want to pick up on the curiosity thing because, funnily enough, right, that's another one of Richard Schwartz's 8 C's.
Mm.
So curiosity. So what if we've looking at connection, curiosity, quest, curiosity and questions, truth, um, creativity. Yeah, I think that's also one of his eight C's, right? So
Mm.
that'd be interesting. Um, if those are some of the things that help us, that drive our thriving, or thriving drivers, driving thrivers, whatever. Um, what do you think gets in our way of thriving?
I think that those insecurities of feeling that we're going to be rejected, the core of it always for me is that I felt like I was going to be rejected. If people saw the shape of my eyes, they would reject me. If they knew that my middle name was Jinja, they're going to reject me. If I do a podcast and nobody listens, that I'm not good enough and that I don't belong here. And so that fear of rejection gets in the way of us thriving because then we're afraid to be able to try new things, to be curious, to ask questions, to connect to a community like you were saying. My parents did it. They said, "Let's go to the whole picnic." I said, "No." I remember my mom saying, "I want you to meet Katie, who's
Yeah.
an adoptee who lives down the street. You could be her friend. She's her same age. She's adopted." And I was like, "I'm not meeting Katie." I mean, and again, poor Katie, I'm sorry. I'm sure you're a very nice person. I wish I had become your friend. But all those things, like you're saying, where we become
Yeah.
at war with ourselves, a civil war within ourselves, that prevents us from being our best selves. And I
Yeah.
would say the other thing for me is that I have struggled with for all my life is jealousy. That I have been jealous of that person with the blonde hair and blue eyes. I've been jealous of the person that is not an adoptee and it feels like they're part of the perfect family, that part of the Sweet Valley High books, which I'm not sure if you have those at the UK, but they're these books for preteens that are about these perfect twins who have the perfect family and these problems of whether or not they get a boyfriend or not. And those weren't my problems, and I was jealous. I was jealous of, um, if I just acknowledge my shadowy side, like, look at Simon Ben, thriving adoptees. He's amazing. I suck. He's great. He's doing all this. I can't do it. And so I shouldn't even do my podcast. I don't know why I
And
just got
hold
a
a
Southern
minute. Hold on a
accent.
minute. How many have you done?
Oh, I can't. I think 60.
Oh, well.
Yeah,
Okay.
see. Yeah. And so you do
You've
that and
done
you compare
60
yourself.
despite that shite.
That's right. And so you compare
Despite,
yourself.
despite the
Yes.
shite. Thriving,
Despite the shite. Oh my
despite
gosh,
the
look at
shite.
us. We're coming up with all sorts of good stuff.
Despite
Like
the
that.
shite.
Despite the
You've done
shite.
60 and you've got a day job and you've done 60 and what have you done? You've ignored that negative voice in your head and you've just
I've
got on
tried
and
to.
done it.
Yeah, I tried to, but again, it's because of like listening to episodes like you, of going to that workshop, and that builds strength. And the more that you can be brave and courageous, maybe that's the other C, is being courageous enough to be able to like listen to Simon and listen to those episodes, listen to his guests, come to those workshops. I mean, it was great. I think there were like 80 people on there, maybe more. And I just sat and listened. I mean, I didn't have to show myself, I didn't have to prove myself. I just had to show up. And that's what I say to everybody, just show up.
Yeah.
That book that I wrote, that novel I
Yeah.
wrote, I had so many people tell me that, it's just, who do you think you are that you could write a novel? And it's 232 pages of crap. And again,
What?
despite the shite, I moved forward with that book because it's my fictionalized version of my lived experience as an
What
adoptee and
right
me
have they
wanting to
got to
share
say
that.
that to you?
Yeah, it wasn't very nice.
To put it bluntly.
Yeah, it was not very nice. So,
Like we have this thing of like bad managers say this to people, when I want your opinion, I'll give it to you.
yeah, yes.
That's like I see, I don't know whether it, everybody's trying to give us their opinion. Like, why does it why do they need to why do they feel they need to give us that? Why do they need to give us their shite?
Because they're, hurt people
Hurt
hurt
people.
people. And I will say, I want to give a shout out to Claire Steele, who lives in England, and Kate Walton, because those two women when I said, "Oh my gosh, I can't do this because I'm not good enough," they said, "That is utter," and they did say, "That's utter shite, Anna, that you do this even if one person listens, even if one person reads it because it's yours."
Yeah,
And you put it out into the world and you are not, do not be afraid of doing this. And there's to this day, I had a conversation with Claire a week ago where she's like, yeah, I said again, Claire, what if only 5 people buy this book? And she's like, who cares, Anna? She's like,
yeah.
just you do it because you love it and because you're meant to do it.
I'm with that. I'm with you on that. And my um, shite is a word that's probably more used in Scotland than England, I would say, right? Anyway, but one of my mentors, Liz, uh, she has been trying to say that if one person listens or one person gets it, that's enough, right? She'd been trying to tell me that for about 12 years. But there was something the way that Vin said it to me
Mm.
um, that landed for me. So I would encourage people that are listening and to keep exploring because you might hear the same thing said. Like it took me 15 years of Liz saying it to me and she tried it in her ways, but the way that Vin said it to me, it landed. So it was almost as if Liz's work was the foundation, and then um, I talk about this like it's like insights. It's like your baby teeth, you know. So they wobble a bit, right? So they wobble a bit, and then they fall out, right? So Liz spent 15 years wobbling the tooth, the belief, right? And then the way that Vin said it, it just fell out at that time. And the other thing is that that doesn't mean it doesn't come back.
Yeah.
But when it
Yeah.
comes back, it's less scary than it was before.
Yeah. And for those listeners out there, I just like the other thing is that when you do this, you heal yourself. And through this process, and for me, doing the podcast and writing the book, it was a healing process for me to be able to come to that place of thriving. I wouldn't be in the place that I am if I hadn't done it. And so, if even if it just benefits, I shouldn't say even, when it benefits you and you step into what Simon's hoping for adoptees, that thriving piece, you can do it, and that's why you
Yeah.
should do it.
I'm gonna share something now, right? That it might be a bit of a surprise. I'm getting a bit embarrassed by how many nice things you're saying to me. I
Well,
I want to because I think I'm pretty good at that sort of stuff, right? I think I'm okay at accepting compliments. Um, we met this woman on holiday a couple of years ago, me and my wife, and we're chatting to her and her son and a daughter. I don't can't remember what, and their parents and stuff like that. And we saw them saw them by the pool, and she. Then we saw them again in the evening, and I said to her, "This is like I don't know, 10 years ago." I said, I said to this woman, "What a fantastic top! I really love the color of that top." And she looked at me like saying that I was taking the mickey, right? That I was taking the piss, like, you know. And she looked at me like, I said, no, really, really, I, I, I used to have I used to have a shirt that color years ago. I don't know what happened to it, but I really love the color, and you've reminded me of that color. And so I'm not taking the mickey. I really do love it. And she just couldn't take um, she couldn't take the compliments. But so I think that I'm okay at taking compliments, and yet I'm feeling just a little bit tricky, you know. So it's really weird, isn't it? It's
well, and
really weird,
I
really
think
weird.
it's the same thing like with Claire and Kate, who gave me support and encouragement. And so when it sometimes it feels like you're just saying that because you want to be nice. And it goes back to the truth. The truth is that, Simon, if we didn't have podcasts like yours, and for me to listen to it and to be able to ask those questions, then I would be lost and I would be like in a place where I'm hating myself. And so I think it's so important when we talked about community and be able to lift each other up in a way that helps us to give us support and encouragement to say, keep doing it. Keep doing what you're doing because it means something to somebody.
Yeah.
And for those who are listening right now, who may have been like, I wore sunglasses to hide who I am, or I hated myself, that they can say, I'm going to take a first step and just like join um, a workshop that Simon presents so I can just listen. I think that's so important. And I think it's just like saying, now I'm sure there are many things that are wrong with me. I'm a procrastinator. I sometimes chew with my mouth open, which is terrible. But I
I
also
don't even
think
know why I'm talking to you.
that
That's a joke, right?
But I do know I genuinely care about people. I care about their stories. I will honor them and love them. And I will like say when it's the truth. Some of my sisters say, "Oh my gosh, you always have something to say to somebody," and it's usually positive. And I say, "But it's never a lie." I will never say, "Oh, I love that dress," when I don't. It'll be I can find something to compliment and say, "I love that about you." And what I love about you, Simon, is that you connect, you create community, and you like foster curiosity in the best ways. And so you just take that, Simon. There you go. There's your
Okay.
compliments.
Thank you. I've taken it. I've
I'm
taken it.
glad.
Yeah. And thank you for all the work that you do. So in the show notes, right, you're going to check out, the listeners are going to check out Anna's podcast, and you're also going to check out her book. So yeah, what else would you like to share? Is there anything else you'd like to share that I've not asked you about?
Yeah, I just think about the book, Adopting Grace. The last thing I want to be able to say about that book is that writing a piece of fiction based on your lived experiences is probably one of the best things I ever did. And if you do that and you just burn it someday or just do whatever, for me, it helped me process in a meaningful way of those things that had happened to me that I didn't want to say to the person or put it out there in a nonfiction or in a blog or anything like that. I wanted to be able to process it in the way that I needed to. And
Yeah.
so for those that are looking to write their books, there are people like Claire that can help you.
Okay. So Claire is like a writing coach.
She is right here in England, and then she just started her own publishing business as well. Unfortunately, it was after my book was picked by a publisher here in the
Yeah.
Midwest. But I think finding someone like Claire Steele is so incredible because um, she just helps you
Yeah.
figure it out.
And I would say, get talk to Claire, find out what Claire's doing, and have a look around. Is Claire an adoptee?
She's not.
She's not. Okay. So there are adoptee specialists, right? So you've got to find. It's a bit like finding a therapist.
Yes,
You've got to find the right support coach, the support community coach, whatever, to help you do that. And while I'm on that sort of subject, if an idea just pops into mind. So if anybody wants to start a podcast, um, then I'd be happy to get on a Zoom call for an hour and share what I've learned about podcasts with people. And I'm pretty sure you would be up for that as well. If you could share
yes,
what you, yeah. Um, hey, we could do that, couldn't we? Why don't we do that?
I
Why
would
don't we
love
do
that.
a panel? But I wonder how many people would there. Yeah, I wonder how many people would want to do that. There you are. You see, if it helps one person, I need to figure that out. Do you think there's many latent adoptee podcasters out there that would want to do about learn about doing a podcast?
I think there are. I think that people say to me all the time, I should do a podcast, but they just don't know where to get started, and it seems so overwhelming. But there are lots of ways to and
Yeah,
resources out there, like the two of us who are willing to help.
yeah. Well, maybe we'll have a think about that and we'll do an event on that.
We'll
Um,
call it Despite the Shite
despite the
uh,
shy. Yeah,
workshop. Yep.
yeah. Thanks, Anna. Thank you, listeners, and we'll speak to you again very soon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.